Good morning. Every year when I come to General Assembly, it's like a homecoming for me. I see old friends from grad school, from previous churches. I run into former students and get to meet their children. And I see some of you who are new friends that I have made along the way as I have attended CBF gatherings. I love coming home every year to see you. And I wish on this 20th anniversary celebration that I could stand before you and tell you stories of those early years, those first gatherings. I wish I could tell you stories of the people who came, of the sermons and presentations given, of the tears that were shed, of the laughter that was shared. But I cannot, because I was not there. I'd like to tell you that it was because I'm much too young to have been there 20 years ago, but the reality is I was too poor. I was in graduate school during those first assemblies, and traveling to Atlanta was out of the range of our budget on a small graduate school stipend. And so I watched from afar, and I read the news coverage, wishing that I could be here with you. But there are people in this room who were there at those first gatherings and assemblies. You heard the words that were spoken. You carry around snapshots in your head of the people that you sat next to and talked with. You remember. Remembering is important. It's critical to us. We need those memories. We need to tell those memories to our children and to our grandchildren. We need to tell those memories to our seminary students and to our younger church members. We need to carry on those memories, for forgetting our past, our shared heritage as CBF Baptist, is too high a price for us to pay. We must not be guilty of forgetting. I was reminded again of the truth of this during a recent reconstruction of one episode of American history. In response to that history reconstruction, Kenneth C. Davis, who is author of Don't Know Much About History, he wrote a piece for CNN, and he said, "Survey after survey shows that Americans are woefully inadequate when it comes to knowing about our nation's past." And then he said, "When American history is gutted, innocently, ignorantly, or deliberately, the outcome can be deadly. Our extraordinary history deserves better." Davis' words ring true for us as CBF Baptist. Our extraordinary history deserves better. And the truth about our history is that we began with loss and pain. Those who came together in 1990 had lost 6 seminaries, mission boards, commissions, committees, a publishing agency. They had lost a trusted denominational structure, and they had also lost ministry positions, professorships, churches, places of influence and service, and some long-held relationships. They had lost their voice, lost their right to speak. Some of them were fired, demoted, banned, and belittled. But most importantly, they had lost their dreams for the future. And that's a significant part of our shared history. We were the losers. And being part of the losing side brings with it a sense of unspoken shame, feeling of anger and doubt, feelings of loss and hopelessness. But if you read our history as CBF Baptists, you will discover that there were some among us who were not crippled by that loss. There were men and women who began to respond to loss by looking for a new way, a new path. And conversations began and plans swirled together. And in the very hot month of August, 1990, a Texas Baptist pastor named Daniel Vestal called moderate Baptists to meet in Atlanta to talk, to worship, and to plan for a new future. And I am sure that Daniel was just a bit taken back when 3,000 Baptists showed up for what was called a consultation of concerned Baptists. Pastors, leaders, professors, seminary presidents, state convention presidents, and lay Baptists, they all came. And that meeting began with these words, spoken by Daniel Vestal. We're here to help, not hurt, to heal, not wound, to unify, not divide, to focus on the future. We're here to encourage one another, learn from each other, pray for each other, and listen to the voice of God through each other. That was our beginning. We began with hopeful words, shared dreams. And a second meeting was held less than a year later, in the much cooler month of May, 1990, also in Atlanta. That was our first General Assembly, and more than 6,000 Baptists showed up. 6,000. And together they formally constituted this new organization and adopted the name Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. And this is my favorite part of our story. The next month, CBF set up shop in one room of a dingy office building in downtown Decatur, Georgia, and they hired Clarissa Strickland as a temporary, 1 day a week, administrative secretary. And so we began with a computer, with a phone line with call waiting, a folding table, and a roll of stamps. And 6 months later, the new coordinating council hired Cecil Sherman to be the first coordinator. And Cecil set off traveling the country, pulling people towards CBF. And Cecil could pull hard, and people came, and CBF grew. And those first 10 years flew by quickly. And in 2001, Buddy Sheridan stood before you and looked back at our first 10 years. And he proclaimed that our first 10 years would go down as a decade of promise because we had stood for, struggled for, and continued to uphold some key principles, including a commitment to gender equality and to the equality of the laity, to an understanding that mission must include, not exclude, acts of mercy and justice, and a shared appreciation of the breadth and depth and richness of the Bible. I would venture to add that during those first 10 years, CBF Baptists had the freedom to dream big, to question often, to disagree loudly, and to hear some new voices. And so in our losing, we left some things behind, but we also found ourselves. We found each other. We gained friendships, networks, partnerships, connections. We gained a fellowship. And then came the teenage years. Back in 2005, I wrote a very brief history of the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship movement. And I began with a quote from the renowned, much celebrated, and greatly loved leader, Bo Prosser. When Bo was asked in 2004, "How's the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship doing?" he answered, "About as well as any 13-year-old that I know." Teenagers. As the mother of 2 teenagers, I have found that the teenage years can be challenging, difficult, and sometimes terrifying. I've been teaching my son how to drive. So he sits in the driver's seat, and I cling tightly to the passenger door handle, trying hard to remember to breathe, praying harder than I've ever prayed in my life. Teenage years. And I've had long conversations with my son about the future. I've talked and talked and talked to him about making good life choices. I've tried to push him to seriously make plans about college and career. And now I get to do all that all over again with my daughter. If I'm honest with you, I must confess that I have loved most every moment of the teenage years. Watching my children grow and become more independent, I've loved figuring out how to relate to them in new ways and hearing them articulate their own beliefs. I loved getting to know them, not as my children, but as people who are wonderful and unique and opinionated. And therein lies the mystery of the teenage years. They are terrifying years, hard years, but they are years of amazing discovery, years to be cherished. And together we as CBF Baptist have walked through the teenage years. We've had some of those typical teenage experiences. We've had sudden growth spurts. We've often grown quickly, and our needs and networks grew before we even had plans in place. So sometimes we outgrew ourselves, and CBF Baptist had to walk around with jeans that were a couple of inches too short and cram their feet into ill-fitting shoes. And like a teenager, CBF has also sought to be independent. We've struggled to move outside the shadow of our parent to gain an identity of our own. And perhaps that has been our hardest place of growth. For even in our teenage years, we as CBF Baptists have fought hard not to be them, to be something other than them. We put much energy into breaking free, to struggling against, to rebelling against our Southern Baptist parent. And we grew weary of that struggle. We got tired of fussing and talking about them. Those same old conversations grew repetitive, and they exhausted us. And yet, we couldn't seem to help ourselves sometimes. We were teenagers, living in a pushback mode, striving hard to discover ourselves. And the truth is that is pretty much part of normal teenage development. Breaking free and being independent doesn't happen overnight. And it's hard for teenagers to let go and move on, even when letting go and moving on is desperately desired. And then there have been some hormonal mood swings that are typical of the teenage years, and we've had some of those. CBF has been awkward at times, but also full of grace. We have sometimes been aloof, sometimes warm and friendly. Sometimes we've been sure of ourselves and confident, but sometimes we've been unsure of ourselves. But one thing we have not been as CBF Baptist is dull. So today we can collectively give a sigh of relief, for we have made it through the teenage years. And while we still have far to go, we are still here. We are still standing. We have done some amazing things, and we are still together. We are 20 years old. And that, my friends, is cause for celebration. We cannot forget from whence we have come. We dare not forget our past. But we dare not be here in Tampa together without taking time to be thankful for having these years together. And as I stand here, I am filled with gratitude for you, my CBF family, and for the 20 years we've had together.